There are cultural differences in between us, and I've been visiting a lot of countries across the world. Part of the body language may be different and the gestures. So for example, ASEAN is much more respectful in terms of bowing. The gestures are more measured in East Asia and Southeast Asia, I would say, than in other parts of the world. Like, for example, Eastern Europe is more like Italy, and particularly Romania, right? We use the hands quite a lot. The Africans use the hands quite a lot, the Latin Americans and so on. So how do we project, or how do we help leadership also via strategic communications techniques? And those, I would say, one of the things which I'm particularly interested in, the storytelling component, the global storytelling component. How do you tell your story globally, right? So for example, in Asia, we have had, I would say, some very memorable, including slogans. I've been to Kuala Lumpur and I told the friends there, I will always remember, I did a lot of global TV, consumption in the 2000s. Malaysia, truly Asia. That slogan was really stuck to people, right? Like incredible India stuck to people, right? In recent times, I think if you play well on positive prejudice, Germany works, right? Because we think that Germans, they're really hardworking, but also that Germany functions. So Germany works is a great slogan. I think that increasingly for global operators, I think that not only the CEO, but the boards, they really need to get highly educated on how they communicate globally. Because I'm sorry to say this, but not all of them are prepared. And sometimes you can see that. From my perspective, although America is considered the land of creativity, I would say that in terms of sound bites, clear and short sound bites, sometimes British politics is even more efficient. The Sunak sound bites when he was a finance minister, and he was very good with his sound bites. And even when upon his successful this time passage, after an initial setback to become prime minister of the UK, the context is really important, and then the emotions around the sound bites. Because, for example, when you're a finance minister, you can be drier and very smart with sound bites. But when you're a prime minister, you're a political player and you need to get the emotions involved. And you also need, for example, to look at the body language component and so on. So for example, when you're younger and you have a lot of energy, the case for people like Macron, Sunak, and so on, I think that this energy shows, but you have to pay attention how you channel it, because power is typically less motion. You typically inspire power when you have firm gestures, not when you'd go like, when it's too fast and so on. I mean, people can sense your energy when it's fast, but you don't necessarily inspire power. From this perspective, I would say power posing helps. The majority of top global leaders, either naturals. I'll give you an example of a natural, Trump. Trump is a natural. I don't think he has been trained, but people like Obama, they have been trained, because I can see the training in their body language. But I say that the trends that we're seeing right now, and like you well noticed, we're going even more into the shallows, and we are becoming shallower and shallower. And it has to do also with, I think, the overcharging of our brain. I read a study some years ago. The average brain was exposed to 400 and something data, days of data, compared to 365. So essentially our brain is overcharged. So it's not, we get too much information. The future from this perspective will be short and emotional and video. The days, and I think from this perspective, leaders of the past had a huge luxury, and they could be efficient and only partially charismatic. But leaders of the present, they're under so much pressure. I'll give you an example. Churchill. Churchill was perfectly adapted for his age, had a really deep voice, commanding voice. But in between us, for radio, in case it wasn't directly on the radio, so live streaming, if we put it in, he could redo the message before airing it via BBC with that deep voice and so on. But I'm not sure if you would have been trolled weekly like leaders nowadays on social media, or with having so many different exposure moments via TV and so on. I'm not sure he would have had, or this kind of leader from the past was considered as very, very high level. Even Margaret Thatcher, right, who was later on. I'm not sure that these kind of leaders would have had an impeccable passage each week, because when you're under TV lens or when you're under social media, under continuous pressure to react fast, to do things perfectly, it's very, very hard. I'm not saying you can't make it, but you're prone to do mistakes eventually, right? Or you're prone to make people dissatisfied. So I can see a lot of pressure on leaders. So leaders, they really have to become better, be short, be to the point, and be emotional. And I would say in political campaigns, we say KISS, keep it short and simple. Keep it also linked to the soul, because if it's not emotional, it will not attract the attention. Just because your soundbite is great, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will become viral. It will become viral if it has something emotional to it, either a big joy behind it or a big sadness behind it. Like from this perspective, the most adaptable leader to the new realities, unfortunately, under conditions of great strain for his country, Zelensky. I think Zelensky is the great depiction of this new leader who, in extraordinary circumstances, has been forced to play with emotion. A video filmed by him with his mobile 2 or 3 days after the war started, and he said in Ukrainian, "I am here. Prime Minister is here. Minister X is here and here. We are all here. We're staying here." So it sent a huge message by saying we are here, you know, that we haven't fled the country, that we should fight, we should resist. And I think that was the moment when the resistance actually started. When I look at Singapore and other countries, I think, and also countries in the Gulf, I see very controlled and professional exposure, normally, which is meant to raise the amount of trust. So, for example, I remember one of the speeches by the Prime Minister of Singapore 1.5 years ago, when we were still under the pandemic, and it was a very clear, short message on the management on the pandemic, on what needs to be done, what has been done, and the impact on the people under. It was clear. I wouldn't necessarily say it was vastly emotional, but perhaps the topic of the pandemic with the management hat does not necessarily, you know, give you the opportunity to be too Latin. You know, we don't have one recipe for the world. There is a personalization, but I can't understress enough, and this is what I did also recently with trainings, 2 aspects. First of all, remember the importance of body language. No matter the civilization, body language is important, and tonality of the voice. Sound bites are great, but if you don't have proper delivery of the sound bites, you have a problem. So body language is key. And second of all, I've developed a framework which I believe is commonsensical. It starts from my favorite color. My favorite color is red, which is a dynamic color. And I call this reality, emotion, direction. Reality, why? Because if you naturally speak about a specific reality, again, in short, and to the point, you know, people understand that you actually understand reality, right? You know what you're talking about. So step 1, start with the reality. I'll give you an example. Inflation. As a leader, I should be saying, I know that prices have risen. So clearly, you know, you show depiction of reality. Second, emotion. It's not enough to tell me that you have realized that the prices have risen. You have to show that you care. I know people are hurting. You know, I know it's difficult for families. So you take reality, you take empathy, you take emotion. But then you're a leader, right? And people expect direction. People expect decision. So finally, the final from red, the direction or the decision. What are you going to do about it, right? The audience does not have the time or the luxury, or honestly, the level of education to understand a pretentious, from my perspective, person talking with neologism, you know, or very complex words. Whereas I think the ideal is, like we say in political communications, make sure you're being understood by your grandma from the village, or make sure that you're being understood by a secondary class kid.